recording of Three Imaginary Boys had been characterised by frequent and often heated studio debate between Parry and Smith. Parry had been vocal with his ideas for the band, while Smith had been equally keen to assert his own vision of The Cure, a vision on which he was not prepared to compromise.
I think from the start it was very much Robert Smith's project. I think he wanted other people to contribute, but maybe they couldn't contribute enough. I think the original lineup with Noel Tolhurst and Matthew Hartley, I think he wanted it to be everybody writing songs, but I think he's just very creative. He's a very creative person. It's hard if you're in a band with somebody he's a very good songwriter. I mean, other people did contribute bits and they did write the odd song, but Robert Smith's stuff is just so much better. It's like any of those bands at the time. Well, any band at any time, there's always one, maybe two dominant members in a group.
Robert was very much the man with his hand on the rudder, but Lol and Michael Dempsey were also quite strongly opinionated, I imagined, and I thought there must be some fantastic bust-ups in the studio when these three are recording something.
Robert Smith must have been, as a child, must be very into almost like progressive rock, or there must be some kind of rock music kind of influence as well, very art rock kind of thing going on. But I think when punk came along, they obviously galvanised them and energised the sound, although they were never ever a straight kind of punk rock band. But that created the audience for them to exist in. I mean, there was people who got into punk weren't just listening out for bands that sounded totally like punk. People looking for people who were going to change rock and roll. This is the whole idea at the time that rock and roll was going to change. And there was contemporary bands, The Cure, there was Joy Division, who I think were a massive influence.
I always think what was interesting about The Cure is that they'd really come out of something like David Bowie, and the idea that David Bowie had written a lot of very strange singer-songwriter type songs, like early on with Hunky Dory and Space Oddity, and then he'd experimented with this idea of glam pop songs with, Ziggy Stardust and up to Diamond Dogs, and I think Diamond Dogs was quite a key thing, because then that bled into that area where he worked with Eno on Low and Heroes, and I think that all that really is the seed of The Cure.
They come out of a sort of gloom rock strand as well. I've always liked the Leonard Cohens of the world, or the some of that more gloomy Joy Division stuff, which I suppose was around more or less at the same time, which was the post. After that first huge explosion of punk rock, you got this Echo and the Bunnymen thing, or Teardrop Explodes thing, or the Liverpool Mob, or Howard Devoto and the Magazine, and the Cure, and then later on you got bands like Bauhaus, and going into the new romantic thing of the early 80s, I suppose.
In the summer of 1979, The Cure were asked to support Susie and the Banshees on tour. They had only performed a couple of dates when the tour took an unexpected turn.
The first big tours The Cure did was supporting the Banshees. It was a perfect tour for them, really. The Banshees always had a really good support balance. It was one of the things out of punk that you didn't wait for your manager to order you what band to take out the road you. A lot of bands at the time were very interested in what was going on, listening to other groups. And they picked The Cure to do the tour with them. So the tour starts and it gets going. And the Banshees split up on about the third day to the tour, when the rhythm section, when the guitar player, the drummer, just walks out on the Banshees. But because the band, Susie's got this really kind of persevering attitude, and instead of skulking off back to London and giving up, they decide to carry on. And they asked Robert Smith to play guitar with them. He learned the songs overnight, and I think they missed out one day to just carry on the tour.
I think he was more annoyed than possibly we were, because it was his first big tour, and these two people were pulling the rug out from under his feet immediately. So by the end of the evening, he kind of offered his services, and we just sort of laughed it off and forgot all about it. Well, we didn't forget, but we didn't think it was possible. And we went through about a week of really torturous auditions for people, and then we just asked Robert, and he just turned up and played 3 songs immediately, perfectly. And we said, "Can you do 2 sets a night?" And he said, "Of course." And that was it. We were back on the road within a week.
It seemed odd at the time. It was like some kind of thing Eric Clapton would do, being 2 groups at once, a kind of super group. But Robert did it out of some kind of perversity, as long as The Cure could keep supporting, giving himself double the work as well. Unbelievable, really. So the tour carried on with Robert, now part of Susie and the Banshees, which he wasn't necessarily the greatest guitar player Susie and the Banshees ever had, because there was something, you know, there was something about him that was other, that didn't quite fit. But I think out of his pop idealism, he wanted to make it work, because, wow, what a great opportunity to suddenly be in this really successful group and I'm the guitar player.
It was quite strange during the tour, because I felt there was quite a bit of, in some strange way, the fact that Robert was playing with the Banshees as well was kind of divorcing him from the rest of his band. And I think Lowell was cool with it, but I think Michael was a bit maybe envious.
I think it nearly killed him. I think, you know, the idea of doubling up and the idea of the tension it caused within the Cure, the idea that, you know, he was suddenly in a more successful group. Oh, and will he leave? And the idea of the Cure without Robert Smith, well, it was no Cure at all, you know. So I think it was a typical move, really, in one sense, because it was it was a kind of good-natured thing, but also it was incredibly messy and led to all sorts of psychodrama. And one of the great things about the Cure, of course, is the constant psychodrama. And this was one of those great soap moments, I think, in the life of the Cure.
I think Robert learned quite a lot by being in the band. I think he learned how to be a front person just by standing next to Susie every night for a couple of months. I think he completely changed his persona on stage because of that. He came out of his shell. I think that he learned how to be a bit more flamboyant and how it was okay. And I think he saw how, you know, how should we put it, Susie's more diva moments were kind of acceptable because they were the front person, and I think he learned how to get away with stuff. And just a bit about stagecraft and learning how to use the audience a bit more, because you know, if you look at early clips of their performances, you can see he's sort of he's much more shy and retiring than he becomes a bit later on. And of course his whole look changes as well.
Well, his look at the beginning wasn't as extreme as it became, and I think it became extreme because of his period in Susie and the Banshees. And I think because he wasn't really part of the Susie thing, and it was something that had just happened and almost sort of killed him in a way, there was almost a sort of jokey response, and he started to dress like Susie, you know, in a way. He started to be physically like Susie, and I think that's really when that whole thing that became known as the goth thing came about. I think for me it was that period he spent. He wouldn't have worn a crucifix or anything without being in Susie. I think he felt that was the uniform, because he takes those kind of things seriously. He's in a group, this is their uniform, I will wear their uniform. And that whole sexual ambiguity thing, I think, came, you know, to kind of copy the way that Susie looked. And Susie's look was such a big influence on the whole goth, what became known as goth. I think for that period Robert kind of got dragged into that. And it kind of exaggerated his glam pop look and turned it into something kind of somewhere between grotesque and inspiring.
He borrowed Susie's lipstick and disappeared to the toilet and came back with basically his trademark look. I think he was probably a bit worse for the wear in some fashion or other, but it sort of sprang from there, and I think he just, you know, he was already getting into this whole idea of the mask and stuff with pornography, and I think working with us just brought that out a bit more, and it gave him that sort of one sort of barrier between the real him and the audience that I think every sort of front performer needs.
I mean, I don't suppose you could avoid it and people go, oh, him, you know, he looks like Joe Brand, or, you know, and the lippy and stuff. But, you know, I've never, ever, I mean, I've always seen past it. And it's just the way he is. And I rather admire him for sticking to it as well. Isn't it true that Mary, she always liked him wearing the lippy and stuff? And so he said, well, you know, if she likes it, I'll keep it, fair enough.